still need the firewall, but we don't need the servers. And so as a part of, they're going to get rid of this, and they're just going to use Azure AD. I have actually done a number of projects in the last couple of years, all for smaller companies, but 20 people or less. But we have, gone through one by one and just removed the workstation from the local domain, joined them to Azure AD, signed in, gotten everything set up, signed out, copied the profile over, and then, they're off and running. One little note about copying the profile. This goes back up to bullet point number 2 there. Anytime you sign in as a new person, Windows is going to create a new user profile for you. If Windows creates a new user profile, that means you don't have access to your documents, your downloads, your pictures, your desktop, your shortcuts, your favorites, etc., etc. Outlook signatures, PST files, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, Microsoft has removed the ability to copy profiles that we used to have with the file and settings transfer wizard. Who knows why they removed that? I have no idea. We personally use third-party software that's fairly cheap, but something you definitely want to look into if you're going to be doing this, because it's extremely tedious. And users get a little ornery when you don't copy all of their data over, and you give them a computer and a desktop that looks completely different, and they're going to, where's all my stuff? So it's sort of a mandatory part of this, and I think something that needs to be noted. Earlier, we mentioned Azure AD Connect. This is another tool that I utilize almost constantly. It's an on-premise tool that's used by organizations to duplicate on-premise identities in Azure AD. Okay, let's use probably the most standard example. Let's say an organization's got 200 users, a couple Exchange servers, and they'd like to eliminate Exchange and go with Exchange Online and Office 365 as a whole. Okay, so we have 200 users that we need to be in Azure AD. So we create the subscription, that creates the tenant, right, and the instance of Azure AD, but when we go in there, it's empty. It's only got an admin account that was used or that was created automatically. So how do we go about populating those users? Well, there are multiple ways, but one of those ways is to install Azure AD Connect in the on-premise network connected to the Active Directory Forest and say, hey, grab all of the users and the groups in these organizational units and essentially replicate them, synchronize them, if you want to use that term, to the cloud. And so that's what we do. And it provides a number of benefits. It allows them to use the same user credentials. So users don't have to worry about their username and password being different on the local network in comparison with Office 365. They can use the same one. If they change their password, they change it internally, and it syncs out to the cloud. So it's not really single sign-on. It's sometimes called same sign-on. But it is going to keep them in sync. If you add a user to a group internally, it syncs automatically, and that's replicated to the cloud. If you delete a user internally, it's removed from the cloud. Those kinds of things. Now, what happens if the user accounts already exist in Office 365? And I've run into this a number of times, and it gets a little trickier, but it's essentially just something that you want to, it's essentially just something that you need to be aware of, all right? So I guess I'll say a red flag for lack of a better term. If you get into a situation where AD Connect is not being used, and the user accounts already exist in Azure AD, it's okay. You just need to take a pause, because we need to then, at this point, we're not creating, we're actually matching. We want the cloud identity for Joe Smith, the Active Directory user account for Joe Smith to be matched to the Azure AD account for Joe Smith. And the only way that's going to happen is through user principal name matching and SMTP email address matching. These are referred to as soft matching. And that works about 95% of the time if you make sure those values are correct. The other 5%, you're going to have to do something called hard matching. It's really more of a specific to Azure AD, specific to Office 365, so I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. But since we're talking about Azure AD, it's most definitely relevant. So soft matching is the default. Hard matching is where you literally go in and type in PowerShell and say this internal object matches this external object and kind of force it to happen. Another thing to remember here is the local Active Directory is always the source of authority in this situation. So objects that are synchronized to the cloud are not going to be fully configurable in the cloud any longer. So there are certain attributes that you can and cannot change. You would not be able to delete the account. You wouldn't be able to rename it, change its username, add email address aliases. You can do all of those things, but you do it internally. So actually that's seen as an advantage because the management doesn't change. You can still use Active Directory users and computers. If you use Exchange, you can still use the Exchange Admin Center to modify these user objects. Then that synchronization happens and that's all replicated out. There are some additional options, write-back options. Predominantly, that's the password write-back option, although there are group write-backs, things like that. Password write-back is kind of the biggest one because if you turn on self-service password reset and you allow users to modify their password in Azure AD, well, then all of a sudden it would be out of sync. And then by default, what would happen is the local Active Directory would synchronize out to Azure AD and it would overwrite the password. Well, we don't want that to happen. So we could turn on password write back in conjunction with the self-service password reset, assuming we have the appropriate licenses. And then users would be able to change their password and it would write it back to the directory. You also have some options for Exchange hybrid, for Exchange public folders. There's an Azure AD Connect single sign-on option. So there are going to be some additional options that are available to you as well. In this demonstration, we're going to look at the AD Connect utility, or just at least discuss it a little bit further to make sure we're fully understanding its place. And then we'll also talk about self-service password reset. Now, both of these things are actually going to be in the Azure Active Directory portal. Okay, so we can get there from the Azure portal as well. Once we get to this location, let's just select on users. Now notice there is a directory synced column here. All right, if you are in the Microsoft 365 portal, you do have to use the choose column feature and ask to actually view that. In that case, it's an icon, so it's either cloud only for a cloud only user or the icon of like a building for directory synced. Here it just says yes or no. Okay, if an object is not directory synced, then I could go in and I could make changes to it. If an object is directory synced, I'm not going to be able to make certain changes. Now I can reset passwords and whatnot, but I'm not going to be able to change a lot of these values. And the reason that I'm not going to be able to change them is because the source here is Windows Server AD. It's got a single source of authority. And so we said that the benefit of doing this is really, I guess you could say there are multiple benefits. I mean, the primary one from a user perspective is that the user accounts and passwords are synchronized. And so therefore the user does not have to remember different passwords for their cloud account and their on-premises account. From a management perspective, that is, that part is good as well. But from a management perspective, it means I can create, I can modify, I can delete all users on-prem as I normally would, and they will simply be synchronized out to Office 365. Okay, so I mean, there's not actually a lot to look at here. Let's go to the portal, the Office 365 portal, and then once we get there, we'll have to can you show me my admin? There we go. And I say there's not much to look at because basically all of this is just set up with AD Connect. So you download and install it. Now, I did go over here because usually on the main tiles, and then if it's not there, it'll be under Service Health. You could see Azure AD Connect, and you can see if there are any issues. And obviously we're having issues here, but it's a demo environment. But you can click on it and you can say, okay, well, it was last synced, 3 days ago. And this is the Directory Services Sync account, and just so you know, that right there would identify the server name that it was on and links to troubleshooting. This ID Fix tool is used for attribute value conflicts and things like that to kind of remedy those. So the steps with AD Connect would be to download and install it on a domain member, give it a global admin account, and give it an enterprise admin account on-prem. and then basically just say, okay, I want to synchronize the entire directory, or I just want to synchronize certain organizational units. I highly recommend, from a practical standpoint, doing the latter. You have the built-in directory and a user's directory and Active Directory that have all kinds of groups that will never be needed in the cloud. So it just kind of muddies the waters if you do that. So just, we're selective on the OUs that we replicate. And then it simply just means that those users can now be managed locally from Active Directory. All right, let's go back to our Azure AD, and we'll talk about our password reset. So if I scroll down here, I see password reset, and then SSPR, self-service password reset. Is it enabled or is it not? And so it's turned off by default. You can say selected and then just choose a group, or you can say now it's enabled for all people. Okay. Now, just so you know, as soon as you do this, users will be prompted to enter in additional authentication methods, like a phone number and an external email address. Now, a lot of times people get confused, and I've gotten confused myself as I've been working with this. It's kind of like, well, why, when I just turn on your ability to reset your password, why would that force you to put in additional authentication methods? That seems like it's multi-factor authentication, and so I can understand the confusion, because yes, it does seem like it's multi-factor authentication. It is not. It's simply saying, okay, well, if user gets in a situation where they have to reset their password, then we need some way to identify who they are, and that's going to be a phone number or an external email address. So just keep that in mind. I always let customers know, as soon as I hit save here, the next time somebody tries to log in to Azure AD, however they do that, usually through, Office, they're going to be prompted to put in additional information. Okay. So at that point, basically it's just save. This is right on properties. I'm not going to save that though. Okay. You can go to authentication methods, and we can choose the number of methods that are required to reset, 1 or 2. You can choose, what options you want to give them. We can even make security questions available. Okay, so if I say security questions, and then I say you have to have 3 questions, right or wrong, then that's going to be the case. And then we can actually click on these. We can hit predefine. We can hit custom. You can come up with all kinds of all kinds of questions, including custom. What year was company limited founded? Okay. So, you can do those kinds of things as well. A lot of people just use the phone numbers and whatnot, but that is fine if you want to define security questions. Just make sure you're making, that is accessible, or that's going to be usable by people, and then we would just save those. We could go to registration. Do we want to require users to register when signing in? Notify users on password resets, notify admins on password reset, these kinds of things. If you are using AD Connect, then we go and we look at on-premises integration. Okay, now it is not, this is an error message that's there just simply because my AD Connect is obviously having problems. But we would want to go here and say, I want you to write passwords back to the on-premises directory. And so AD Connect would have had to have been set up like that. Self-service password reset and password write back are not the same thing, but they typically go hand in hand. If we're going to allow somebody to reset their password, then we are going to write that password back to the on-premise environment so that their password remains synchronized and remains the same. All right. So that's a quick look at password reset and a discussion on AD Connect. That's going to do it for this demo as we move on talking about identity management in Azure.